So Terri told you a little bit of the why. I'd like to move in and tell you the how. How do you start a podcast? What does it entail? What's the time commitment and equipment needed? How do you distribute the content? Why should you be thinking about this as the next marketing tactic? And at the end, I'm going to tell you how you can get started. So let's jump right in. I'd like to tell you a few facts about audio that hopefully kind of lends to the credibility of understanding why it's such a great medium to be looking at to add to your marketing strategy. So let's jump right in. The first thing I'd like to talk about is buying power. $92,205 is the median household income for podcast listeners who listen to science, business, and technology podcasts. In addition, 62% of heavy podcast listeners go and visit a website for a product mentioned in that particular episode. And of that 62%, 40% of them usually buy in some capacity. To elaborate kind of on the SEO value and input that Terri mentioned earlier, I'd like to note that about 5,850 words are generated from a 45-minute podcast. That's per episode. And lastly, I'd like to just talk about the market a little bit. About 40% of podcast listeners tune into 4 or more episodes each week. 53% of US consumers who are 18 or older that listen to podcasts listen to podcast episodes at least once a week. So pretty regularly. Now that I've told you a few facts, I want to jump right in and talk about what a podcast entails kind of from start to finish. So let's look at it. The first step in the creating a podcast episode is your show planning. This is going to be a stage where you're going to want to outline the episode format, the segments, sponsors, topics, and potential guests that you want to reach to. This helps ensure that you pre-planned enough content so that you can continuously roll out content that's on brand, that's on a focused topic, or that's going to create and generate the leads or ROI that you're wishing for. The next step in the process is going to be guest booking. So this is the part where you gather a list of leads or partners of interest and you reach to them. We recommend doing this in kind of a sales pipeline format. And so everything from scheduling the pre-interview to the actual interview to the touch points after that, whether it be thanking them for doing the audio episode or just sharing the content that they could share. We recommend that you do this using a sales pipeline and really run your guest booking as a full process and a full addition to your sales team. The next step would be recording. So your actual physical recording. There's a few different ways to do this. You could do this in a studio like I am now. You could do it at home or from an office using your own equipment and a remote recording software. If you're not in the same room, you could do it with 2 different people in completely different places using a third-party platform. Either way you do it, I do recommend that you think about doing your content in a batch format. We know that you're busy and time is of the essence. And so one of the most successful ways to do this, like in the case of Russell, like what Terri mentioned earlier, is setting aside a day and a time in which you can knock out several different episodes at one time. Blast those off to your internal or external production team, and your content's done for the month. One of the biggest things about podcasting is you have to do it consistently. And to do it consistently, you have to plan. So that starts in your show planning phase. And the execution of recording your episodes and setting aside time to do it consistently each month. This will make sure you have the best success and great results like Russell. The next step of the podcasting episode is to move to the post-production phase. And so in post-production, this is where you actually take your audio and it gets edited, mixed, and mastered, and gets ready to be put out on platforms. Now, if you're recording video in your podcast, then you're also going to have to post-produce the video, and this would be done in that stage. And that's where all of your content would come from. And then finally, you're at the last stage, which is the distribution. This is going to be scheduling your audio episodes to go out on your hosting platforms. And then it will also entail the distribution of your video assets, show notes, different social media assets that you'd like to put out on different platforms. And so the distribution phase is the last phase, and it's where everything goes out from all the hard work you've done. So after kind of going through the process, I'd like to highlight just a little bit of the equipment recommendations we have so that you can get started. These aren't the only items that you can use, but these definitely are a professional solution and will kind of just give you a good ballpark of where you could start. So let's talk equipment a little. The first piece of equipment we're going to recommend is the Electro-Voice RE20. It's the microphone I'm using now. It is a professional solution. It's going to run you about $449, but it's the one that we recommend. And I've got my audio expert here on the call with us. You can ask as many audio questions as you need. But this is going to give you a great sound. Hear it? The next thing that you're going to want is a recording interface. And the one that we recommend is the Scarlett 18i8. It's going to run you about $419. And this is going to allow you to record multiple microphones, multiple audio files, and to manage the volume of your audio as it's recording. And the last thing you're going to need is an external recording software. And so what we recommend is Riverside.fm. That's going to help you record a remote podcast. That'll help you capture high quality audio, high quality video on both ends. And the packages differ based on the different subscriptions. So that would be a monthly subscription. There are additional accessories you'll need. Some people prefer to have a microphone stand. You will need an XLR cable and a third-party recording software. I love using Macs because they already come preloaded with GarageBand, but you can use other softwares as well, such as Audacity. So now you know the process, and now you know some basic equipment to get started. Let's talk about the time distribution and time commitment that this requires. That's something I always get asked about. So, how long does creating a podcast take? On average, it takes about 8 to 10 hours per episode, and here's why. An hour of that is typically spent doing your episode planning. Next, you move into the guest booking phase, which essentially is a sales process. It takes about 2 hours to get your guests booked, pre-interviewed, communication, etc. Then, it's typically about an hour per recording. Now, if you do a 30-minute podcast, we do still see a little bit of time added on because you have to set up your room, get the podcast episode done, and then clean up after that. So again, the hour is an estimation based on the per episode spend. Next, you're going to go into your post-production, which is the longest time-consuming piece of this process. And that typically takes about 3 hours. Lastly, you're going to do the distribution. So most of this is pre-scheduled, but that, of course, takes time loading into all of the platforms. So that's about 2 hours. So like I said, on average, 8 to 10 hours. So I've told you the time commitment, and I've told you somewhat of a starter cost. So the question I get asked most often next is, why would I do this? So let me show you how much content you can get out of one podcast episode. Let's take a look. So, using a podcast episode as your pillar piece of content creates just a plethora of micro content from this one audio file. Add some video on there, and you've now created on top of that a whole suite of social media assets that you can use on your website and on different platforms. But namely, four places that you're going to be distributing your podcast episode is first on your website. Hello, SEO, ranking, keywords. These are all things Terri taught us about, right? And so you could do that in the form of a blog or an article from your podcast episode through your show notes. You could do a podcast landing page that drives people back to the website and highlights and summarizes each episode, also with an embedded player. You could create a resources tab on your website, and you could host some of the most popular questions and answers that lend to credibility or just information in your industry and post those on your website as well. The next obvious place is going to be social media. This is going to be where you're going to use video clips, audiograms, quote cards, industry infographics, things that provide value to your audience and that allow your brand to be social and humanized. The next thing that podcasting does is it helps you create a great community. From this podcast, you could create an email list, you can create a Clubhouse group, you can make connections on LinkedIn, and you can host virtual events like this one. And then, of course, there's the traditional method of actually using your podcast as a sales pipeline. And so from this, you generate leads, you create a sales funnel that you follow up with, you create a drip email campaign, and you can sell other things like webinars and e-courses on your industry on specific topics. This all comes and can be repeated from this one podcast episode. So that's why we tell people podcasting's worth it. You can 10x your content output like that from this one piece of pillar content. So, what holds people back from moving forward after this great news? A couple things: time, money, expertise. So, let me tell you a little bit about what we can help you with as a production company. So we talked about how long it takes to create a podcast, 8 to 10 hours per episode, right? Well, as a production company, we can save, and we do save our customers on average about 8 hours per episode. We take care of booking, production, distribution, project management, so that our customers can do what they do best, which is create great, high quality conversations with industry experts that provide value to their audience and establish them as thought leaders. That's something we can never do. And most of the time, you can tell the difference between great content when the host has the time and bandwidth to really focus on the quality of it. That's kind of why we came about. So I'd like to walk you briefly just through our 4 suites of services and what partnering with us could look like. So there's a couple different ways you could partner with Speakerbox. The first one is most popular. It's our podcast setup process. We've designed a 7-phase program specifically to help B2B brands launch their podcast from setup to publishing your first few episodes. We take care of all of the cumbersome technology pieces. We help you outline your show. We help you get it published. We help you come up with your sales funnel and distribution strategy. And so really we take a lot of the headache out of the initial launch process. So a lot of these stages that we walked you through earlier, we'd actually physically walk you through in your launch program. Moving forward, we continue to offer audio and video editing services. And to make sure that you're never at a lack for podcast guests, we also offer guest booking. So in partnering with us, we definitely can take off some of the load. But at the end of the day, you have to believe in the value that audio provides to your marketing strategy. You have to implement different processes and really take a hard look at what it is that you want to see from these results. And here's why audio is one of the best things to use for driving leads and creating content. Audio provides you a unique opportunity to form deeper relationships with your customer. Your conversation is literally in your ears. In moving through the different generations, we all buy and think about buying differently. We're moving into the phase in which we're marketing to millennials and Gen Zers. These are the group of people that care most about what brands stand for, how they socially interact, and really what they're about before they even want to spend dollars. So hosting thought-provoking conversations really humanizes your brand and allows you to connect and educate a niche community. And you get to forge relationships in the process. Podcasting is your listeners self-select whether or not they want to consume your content. And so in an age where we're focused on providing on-demand content, what you've essentially done by creating a podcast is brought all of your niche customers into your realm and allowed them to self-select, so the potential that they're going to convert is actually much higher than when you use other mediums. Audio is also the longest standing piece of media. Let's think about it. From performances to radio to jingles, to compact disc, digital media, and now to voice assistants, it continuously has withstood the test of time over the decades. At this point, as business owners, we're all thinking about how we grow the business. Maybe you're a CMO. We're all thinking about how we grow business and how we stay above water. We now have to be hurricane proof, recession proof, pandemic proof, and audio allows you to do that in various forms. Lastly, I'd like to leave you with this. Of the different marketing tactics that Terri mentioned earlier, not one of those other pieces of pillar content provides you the same value in micro content distribution as podcast audio does. And essentially, podcast allows you to do more with less. You already have a marketing budget. You're already spending time on tactics. So if you're going to pick one, pick the one that helps you convert the most leads into customers, that allows you to do more with less, and that maximizes your ad spend and dollar spend in your marketing budget. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I do want to give you some practical numbers and next steps that you could get started with. So I'm going to briefly show you 3 options to get started. So I've created a podcast launch audio only package and a podcast launch audio and video package. The highlights of this are you're going to come out of each of these things very knowledgeable about what podcasting looks like for your brand. You're going to understand what it takes from start to finish. You're going to have your first 2 episodes produced and up. Your podcast cover and distribution channels will be set up for audio, and we'll walk you through different micro content strategies, scripting, and sales follow-up that you can do with your podcast. So essentially, this is a white glove treatment for you. We'd love to walk you through start to finish getting your podcast off the ground. At this point, we'd love to save some time for questions. So I'm going to invite Terri back to the stage to answer a few questions with me. And thank you guys so much for sticking with us. Hold your questions. Don't forget, it's not too late. If you'd like to add some in the chat, just make sure you hit those in the Q&A feature. And I do want to mention that we do have a third person who's available to answer questions. So of course, you've got Terri Hoffman here. You've got myself, but we also have Ray Smith, who is our audiovisual expert. So if that's something that you'd like to ask a question about, don't be shy. Thanks.